Hey there, buddy, Paller here, and welcome back. Today we're going to be picking up part 2 of the Supreme Planetary Annihilation series. We're going to be focusing on Supreme Commander and its expansion, the Forged Alliance. And again, if you're not familiar, this series we're looking at the Total Annihilation game was part 1, and now the spiritual successors to it, which is Supreme Commander 2, and the upcoming Planetary Annihilation. Part 2, here we are, Supreme Commander. Now, Supreme Commander is a game from a gentleman named Chris Taylor. As we discussed in the last video, Cave Dog, when they went under, the rights for Supreme Commander, for Total Annihilation, were sort of just lost. No one could actually get a hold of the rights or everything, and so a direct sequel to this point has been unavailable. Chris Taylor, however, was one of the primaries, if not the biggest name, in regards to Total Annihilation. He went ahead and went off and created his own developer called Gas Powered Games. And this is where the Supreme Commander franchise came from. In 1997, 10 years after the release of Total Annihilation, February of 1997, we got Supreme Commander. And then later that year, in November of 2007, did I say 97? Total Annihilation was released in 97, Supreme Commander was 2007 in February. Then in November of 2007, we got the Forged Alliance expansion. So we're looking right there in that 1 year window. We got the entire Supreme Commander 1 set. And I'm going to mostly be discussing the overall Forged Annihilation. It was a traditional PC expansion, so it just went over top of it and added features to it. It's not like they're two separate games. Although Forged Alliance was a standalone package, you could buy just Forged Alliance and it would run, but you would not have a lot of the base units. You could only play the new faction, and I'll get into the factions here in a little bit. So anyway, Chris Taylor made GPG, Gas Powered Games, went on and made Supreme Commander, and you will notice right away if you watch the last video that this game looks a heck of a lot like Total Annihilation. And that's because, as I was saying, it is 100% the successor in everything but name. Or 100% the sequel in everything but name. Now, the initial game, Supreme Commander, the first one, came out with a moderate campaign. We'll discuss the single player here a little bit. The campaign was what you would consider a traditional RTS campaign. They dropped the 2-faction war in place of a 3-faction war. Now, the 3 factions are the UEF, which are basically the Americans. They are NATO, or the United Earth Federation. You have the Cybran, which is what we're playing right here. They are a race of hybrids. They're very much back towards the factions that were in Total Annihilation, where they're an integrated human robotic symbiosis type faction. And then the Aeon, which are they're a little hard to describe. They're religious zealots based after an alien race, and they're very high tech compared to the other 2 factions. So they brought these 3 factions in, and the campaign would be mostly what you would expect. You pick one of the 3 factions and you play through, and each faction has about 10 missions, and throughout that you uncover the story of the war between these 3 factions. In the Forged Alliance, though, they took the campaign in a bit of a different way. In Forged Alliance, rather than being 3 separate stories, they brought in a 4th faction, a super faction, the Seraphim. And this faction is kicking butt, killing everybody. So the 3 factions group up in order to fight the Seraphim. And that is the faction, if you just buy Forged Alliance, that you get to play. The other factions are locked out as they're part of the base game. So, in place of the 3 different faction stories in Forged Alliance, you actually only have 6 missions that you can play from any one of the 3 factions. So you pick whichever faction you want to play as, and then you play through the mission. And the mission is the same regardless of who you play as, minus some of the audio details and everything are slightly different. Much shorter, but it's not as short as it may seem, as we'll get into in a little bit, but this game very much suffers from the same problems of Total Annihilation, where it can really drag on. A single one of these missions can take 2 hours. Some of the later ones can take 3 to 4 hours. So although it's only 6 missions, you're looking at 12 to 18 hours of actual content within those missions for the factions. And there are somewhat moderate reasons in order to play both. Now, neither one of these campaigns quite lives up to the original Total Annihilation campaign. As I said, that one was just amazing. But they are pretty darn good, even by today's standards. They're not StarCraft 2 standards. They don't have that polish, that amount of CG. But they're better than, say, the campaigns in any of the Command & Conquers. They're better than the campaigns in really any of the Dawn of Wars or anything. They're right in there for higher end campaigns on a non-Blizzard level. Let's just Blizzard. They do polish. They know how to do those type of things. These guys are a little bit below that. Overall, like I was saying, they won't hold up to Total Annihilation. But this isn't really a game that most people are going to buy for the campaign. You're going to buy this to either play multiplayer or skirmish. And I'll tell you right now, there is still active multiplayer. We'll get into that in a little bit here. Now, the skirmishes, the battle, the actual combat within game, this is very much about as good as it gets for this type of RTS. And by this, I mean somewhere in between a 4X strategy game and your standard RTS. We could look at similar RTS games like, say, Sins of the Solar Empire, where it is a real-time game, but you're fighting over entire galaxies, and the individual battles tend to be a little less hands-on. There's a lot less micro in something like Sins of the Solar Empire. This has traditional Warcraft Command & Conquer micro, but in a much larger scale. And in fact, in a larger scale than even Total Annihilation had. So where Total Annihilation was, by default, non-modded, unit cap limits of 250 per faction, with 4-player maps, this has unit caps at 1,000 with 8-player maps. So we're talking a difference of 1,000 on the map compared to 8,000 on the map. Now, like I said, you're never going to realistically see 8,000 units on a single map, but we are talking a big step up, and it's not unheard of to have 2,000 or 3,000 units wander around the map trying to kill each other. And that's where, as with Total Annihilation, Supreme Commander absolutely shines through and is still, by today's standards, an amazing RTS that any RTS fan should take a serious consideration and a look at. As we're saying, there is still currently active multiplayer. It's not through the traditional game launcher, so there was a separate launcher called GPG, GPG.net, which was the launcher for the game. This has been abandoned by gas-powered games. But there is a community very similar to the community that is behind Total Annihilation called Forged Alliance Forever, or FAForever.com. If you go over there, they have updates and everything for Supreme Commander Forged Annihilation that you should really look at. They will give you your own updater, and they have their own multiplayer system that is still currently running. They do ladders, they do 2v2s, 4v4s, all that stuff. The ladders have their own matchmaking system built into them and a ranking system for new players and everything. And it's quite amazing what they have done. There is still a very active multiplayer community around Supreme Commander. Even more so than Supreme Commander 2, but we will leave that for next time. Outside of the single player, we do have a really good community. We have a large-scale game, but let's break it down a little bit more, talk about some of the goods, some of the bads. Overall, it's going to be almost entirely positive. Let's get the bads out of the way first, and then we will go into the bonuses that it brought in. As the bads are mostly what came over from the original Total Annihilation. And that's mostly going to be the game speed. And this isn't going to be bad for everybody. Let me put that out there. Some people are going to love how slow this plays out. These are bads by my opinion. I would imagine a lot of people agree with me, but not everybody is going to agree with me. And very similar to, as I was saying, Total Annihilation, the game can really drag on. As with the campaign, some of those maps can take upwards of 3 to 4 hours. And a lot of this is because of the higher tech level now. So in the original Total Annihilation, there was 2 techs, Tech Tier 1 and Tier 2. There's now 4 tech levels. 1, 2, 3 and experimental. And things get exponentially more expensive as you move up. Some of the experimental units in this game take over, if you take just the single construction unit that can make it and tell it to build it, it'll take it over an hour in real time to build. So you can just see we're talking about real crazy expensive type units to build here. It's a little ridiculous. Now those can be sped up. You can put multiple construction units on these guys in order to get them done quicker, but you're still talking for some of these like big heavy artillery pieces or big heavy mass generators, 20 minutes of real time in order to build them. In fact, the whole game that you've been watching so far has been running at 3 times speed. Now, whereas Total Annihilation, I was comfortable running that at 5 times speed, there's a little more that goes on within Supreme Commander. There's more you need to watch over in order to handle that. I can't really do it at 5 times. I can normally do it at 3 times. Maybe later game when everything is built up and I am just looking to finally conquer the enemies, then I will bump it up to a bit higher of a speed. But just keep that in mind, everything has been going 3 times faster than it normally would, and that's where we're sitting right now. So you have those very long build times. You also have an exorbitant amount of resource costs, to the point where, for the most part, I can almost never, until I'm about to win, actually get ahead on my resources. If you look here in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see my mass and my energy, and they're almost never full. They're always going down, and in fact, for about half this game, one or the other is I'm always going to be waiting on it. I'm going to be at the absolute max of what I can and using it as soon as it comes in. And this, again, adds in to slow down the game. And what it is the structures that build like Tech 3 equipment consume 3 times more power and mass than a Tech 1. So you have a combination of things that take extremely long to build and then end up taking even longer just because there's not enough resources on the map. Normally it's mass that you're dealing with, as the few mass locations get fought over quite furiously, and it's hard to control enough of them to completely build everything. They do have things called mass fabricators, which turn energy into mass, but these are high-tech, high-tier items that take a ton of power, so you need to be building both Tier 3 power generators and then Tier 3 mass fabricators in order to make enough mass. And it basically takes about 2 of these large generators to power 1 fabricator. And then a single enemy nuke, they're all gone, and now you're back to ground zero. So there's just this balancing where I think the mass extractors need to produce more mass. So for the most part, that's the 2 big issues, and both of them tie in together. They added in the higher tier tech stuff in order to keep it, in order to increase how much it costs. They went ahead and they moved beyond, but then the extractors and everything just can't keep up. So, yes. As for the good stuff that it did, well, we've already covered some of this. For example, we went into how the actual the techs, they've increased more techs. You have the 3 techs and then the experimental units. We've also gone into how they've increased the actual unit numbers, which was part of the big thing of Total Annihilation, was just the feel of these massive amounts of units moving around the map. So both of those have been actually improved. Improving even beyond that. They went ahead and they simplified the system by which you get to higher tier tech. So in Total Annihilation, you'd use your commander, you'd build a Tier 1 land factory. From that Tier 1 land factory, you would build a Tech Level 1 land factory construction unit. You would then take that Tech Factory 1 construction unit and build a Tech 2 factory for land. You no longer have to do that. Factories are now upgraded. You can upgrade factories from it. You can take a Tech 1 factory and through a resource cost, upgrade it to Tech 2. You don't have to put down another one next to it or get rid of the old one. No, it just automatically upgrades to a Tech 3 factory, or a Tech 2 factory, and then a Tech 3 factory, and will gain the new build units. You will still need Tech 2 and Tech 3 construction units to build some of the other stuff, the non-upgradable items, like, say, landing pads for your aircraft, higher-level defensive systems, nuclear missile defense systems. These things are not something that are upgraded. You need, like, a Tech 3 construction bot in order to build them straight up away. But a good, roughly half or so of the primary items can be directly upgraded. Mainly your construction facilities, your radar facilities, your mass extractors. Those are the big ones. And your sonar systems can all be directly upgraded. So for example, you can put down a Tech 1 mass extractor, which will only extract 3 mass at a cost of 5 energy. You can then upgrade it to a Tech 2 mass extractor, which will extract 6 or 7 mass at a cost of 10, and then upgrade it to 3, where it'll extract 12 mass at a cost of 15, I believe. Don't quote me on these numbers. So there's no need to destroy your old mass extractor. You can just upgrade it right away to a newer one with a certain cost, and it'll take however long it would build to upgrade it. Overall, these are all very good things. They're still ridiculously expensive, and they do slow down the gameplay a bit more, having to go through the different techs. But I believe it was a good thing, and we'll get into why I'm talking about it like that in the next video. Hint, hint, they screwed it up in Supreme Commander 2. So, you gained all this new tech. Within the techs, the actual units are roughly the same of what you would expect from Total Annihilation. There's about, 5 or 6 different Tier 1 guys, there's about 4 different Tier 2 guys, and then about 4 different Tier 3 guys across the board. And each faction does have their own unique takes. Playing as the Cybran, we tend to run big guns. That's kind of the Cybran thing. They tend to have some of the heaviest hitting weapons, but they tend to be slow firing, and they also tend to be slow moving in terms of vehicles and everything that they have. So that's their trade-off. Whereas the Aeon, they tend to have high mobility, fast moving type vehicles. In fact, almost their entire army is on hovers. They use levitating tanks and everything, so they can take their tanks and they can drive them directly across water and come right into you. You don't have to worry. They can invade you via land with their tanks, which obviously the Cybran could not do, neither can the UEF or the Seraphim. Although every faction does have a few amphibious vehicles, but almost the entire Aeon fleet is amphibious. Then the UEF, they tend to focus very much on survivability units. They have units with shields, they have shield generating units, they have stealth units, so that's kind of their strength. They also focus on defensive turrets. They have some of the strongest artillery in the game, if not the strongest, and the longest range artillery. And then this is the moving through. Then the experimentals are where the game really starts to shine and can really pick up a little bit of steam. The experimental units are now much better, far more useful, and far more varied. For example, the Cybran UEF, or the Cybran experimental units vary from, they have these giant spider bots that they can build. They're not spiders, they're not 8 legs, I think they're 6-legged. They might be 4, I can't remember looking at them. You'll see some later on here, where each one in real time would take about 15 minutes, but I can get that down to about 5 with multiple construction units. They have a giant gunship that flies around and just rains down death. And they also have some other neat units. They have a rapid fire artillery installation, or artillery piece, similar to what the Vulcan was back in Total Annihilation, but it doesn't have quite the range on it. They have that. The Aeon, they have some unique stuff. They have a upright walking, so a 2-legged massive mech. It looks like something out of like an 80s movies. What was it? Rocket Jocks or Battle Jocks? There was some movie in the 80s where these big guys, they got in these mech warrior type mechs, and it looks like something out of that. And the thing is, compared to our Snake Walkers, quite a bit more power. Our Spider Walkers, quite a bit more powerful than those, but it's also more expensive. They also get a giant flying saucer. It looks like something directly out of Independence Day, and it'll fly over your base and just beam down this massive beam of death. You see this thing coming, you got to throw everything you have at it, because if it gets over top your base, you're done. So that's like what the Aeon has, and then the UEF, they have artillery cannons. They also have a massive tank that can drive through water, very similar to the one in Total Annihilation, actually. Yeah, this tank that can also build land vehicles and everything else. They also have some of the long-range artillery and high-powered shields. So you can see each faction has their own unique units that have hard counters and soft counters that you need to focus on and everything. But the main thing is getting them built, as they can take a very, very long time and an immense amount of resources. There are some other nice little things brought in. You may notice these little lines connecting some of my generators to different factories, and around every one of my mass extractors I put these other things down. So there are these interconnections, I don't even know how to classify them at, that boost the performance of certain items. By having these, so around the mass extractors, I'm putting down mass storage. And by putting down these mass storage, I increase the performance of the mass extractor. So maybe instead of getting 12 mass out of them, I get 15 mass out of them every second. For the construction plants, I'm putting these power generators down in between them. When they're connected to it, each generator will knock about 1 second off of a construction time of a certain item down to about 10% off. So by putting these generators down, I can build things slightly faster. Nothing crazy. Any one unit's going to be a difference of 5 or 6 seconds. But over the course of an entire battle, you could end up producing an additional 20 or 30 units over your enemy at a faster rate. So it brings about a different element in order to figure out how it is you want to go about setting up your units, getting them positioned and everything, setting up your base in a certain way. And I just really, really enjoy it. It's not enough to, you can't screw up your entire army in order to get it done. If you can do these interconnections, it'll make your base 5%, 10% more efficient, but it's not worth putting things in a poor location in order to do it. I don't know if that makes sense or not. So that, for the most part, I think that covers all the primary goods and bads. All in all, Supreme Commander is a very good spiritual successor to Total Annihilation. It brings about the updates for the modern gamer that we need, put it in a nice package that didn't really sacrifice on the history of the original franchise. And actually, I kind of skipped over a few things. The other things that it does very well that are a little easier to overlook just because they're kind of expected now. Obviously, it brought in, you've seen me zoom in and out everywhere, where I can go all the way to the max zoom level, where I can see the entire map at once, all the way down to a single unit. Allows for much easier movement of your units. You can take entire fleets and move them across the map and see where they're going at one time. It allows for better perspective. Now, I am playing this map with the Fog of War turned off. I don't normally do this. This is more for presentation purposes, as you want to be able to see. It makes it more entertaining being able to see the entire map at once. As, like I said, the fun of the game is seeing these massive battles going on. So that's why the Fog of War is off. They also brought in better things like I can queue up multiple items, and if I script that queue, I don't have to cancel out the entire queue. I can go back and I can click and drag to move the item around as long as the construction hasn't started on it yet. So you can, if you place down a turret in the wrong spot, you can click it and move it around a little bit, or something to that effect. You can also cancel just one item in the chain of things that are being queued up. And then you have the basic controls that work for mass unit selection, because you can have, 500 different aircraft. Whereas in Total Annihilation, you could choose that control group 1 or 3 or whatever you would want your aircraft to be, but you had no idea of the number of aircraft you had or the status of those aircraft. The new UI does show that. It'll show, okay, you have 26 of this type of aircraft, 30 of this type of aircraft, 50 of this type of aircraft. These aircraft are in need of fuel. It'll show all of that in the GUI in a great manner. So I jumped way ahead here now to finish up a little bit. I want you guys to see some of the final battle as it comes together. I've constructed up 4 of the medium-sized spider bots, 1 of the really big ones, and 1 of the big gunships. And this will be enough to completely decimate any enemies, the resistance of these last 2 factions trying to hold out. I'm also building up a navy right now in case it does turn into a problem, but I don't see it happening. These spider bots will take care of this without any major problem. So overall, I love this game. I cannot, to an RTS fan, I cannot recommend it more. It's not perfect, but it does something that no other RTS currently on the market does in a fully polished state. It is the best of Total Annihilation with a modern UI, modern GUI, modern amenities added into it. And it works great. Now, if you're not a huge RTS fan, or you don't like long drawn-out games, probably not going to do it for you. By the time I was done, this was 120 minutes long, and that was, again, at the whole thing captured at 3 times speed. So you get a pretty good idea. Now, most matches aren't going to drag out quite that long. I let this one go intentionally long, as I wanted to get pretty much one of everything built, so I could show it off. The gunship alone takes like 40 minutes real time to build, so right there was a long time going. But you can pretty easily expect 3 to 4 hour matches on anything over 2v2. They're just going to drag on. So if you're not a fan of that, this isn't going to change your opinion. And it's not going to be a game that most people want to watch, it'll just drag on. But for the RTS fans, if you don't have this or haven't played this, you're missing out. You can pick up the Gold Edition, which is both the base game and the expansion pack, for $20, or you can pick up them each independently for $15. Now, Forged Alliance is all you need for the FA Forever group, the community, in order to play online and play the ranked matches and everything. However, I would not recommend doing this, as you'll miss out on some things. There are some weird units that you won't get if you don't have the base game. And since it'll only be $5 more than buying just the base game, if you are going to look into this, just spend the $20 and get the full complete edition. Or wait for it to go on sale and get both. It doesn't make sense to buy one or the other, even though both are standalone independents. And I think that's the biggest argument I can make for it. If you want a classic feeling RTS, but with the modern amenities, with the quick zoom in and zoom out, the quick moving around, the updated unit groups, the construction groups, the infinite builds, all these great features that it just does so well, this is the one you have to go to. Because, as we'll find out coming up here, Supreme Commander 2 screwed it up pretty bad. It still has a few strengths to it, but overall it screwed up pretty bad. And then Planetary Annihilations looks promising, but it's from a different group, and it's still in a pretty rough beta. So you gotta be careful with that until we see a bit more of it. Okay, so there you have it. This has been Supreme Commander Forged Alliance. I've been Paler. Thanks for watching.